Okay, so here I'm starting with the warm green mixture using mostly phthalo green and transparent red oxide. And in the right corner of the screen you can see what actually I see when I squint heavily. So this is what I try to represent in the very beginning of the process. So these dark shapes, they will work as a wireframe for both for composition and for the likeness, for the representation of the head. So on this stage, the most important is just to create representation of the shadows, as being said, and the placement of the features is the size is not so important, although the placement and the alignment of the features is really crucial, because I don't want to indicate I don't want to place the mouth off of center line, for example, or I don't want to place the eyes on the line which is not parallel to other constructive lines in the head. So mostly I just focused on the general and basic things now. Like you can see that distance between the eyebrows is way more narrower than I see it on the photo. It doesn't matter because I'm going to paint over it anyways. What is really important is just the placement of the most crucial features and landmarks of the head. As usual, I work on the oil ground panel, so it is easier for me just to erase and to move paint around. It is why I prefer to work on such panel at such grounds, oil ground or lead ground, both panels or canvases. So now I've started to feel the approximate colors already. I just squint and I see just desaturated pale pink and yellow shapes in the lights. And my goal is to feel everything as soon as possible. So I don't want the color of the ground of the canvas or on of my panel to distract me from judging the values in the head. As you can see, I work with my favorite palette now. Two yellows. One is really bright and high value, and second is darker in value and also very strong in chroma. Transparent red oxide, vermilion, alizarin crimson, ultramarine blue, phthalo green, and cerulean blue. And in the beginning there was an umber just below the cerulean blue. So I've mixed my initial greenish brown using umber, transparent red oxide, and phthalo green. So you see, the point is to map the shadows as soon as possible, and it makes half of the construction already done. So when we have these shadows, it doesn't really matter the actual color of the shadows. What is really important is to keep the temperature of the shadow the same as temperature of the shadow in our reference. So the shadows are relatively warm, so yeah, it's like I do the same. Even if I use green, I mix it with a lot of transparent red oxide to make a warm green or greenish brown type of color. The muzzle of the mouth, the lips, the nose, the eyes, everything is slightly bigger than I see and than I need, because I'm going to paint in these areas, going on top of them with a lighter mixture, so I can refine the shape, I can bring back the likeness, and I also can just adjust the placement, the shape, the center line, everything without repainting, rather just going with the upper layer. And the point is that the lights are going to be thicker anyways. So I keep in mind that the lights are going to be thicker, there will be more paint, so I prefer to start with a shadow first, because I like to keep the shadows as transparent as possible. First, to reduce the glare in my painting, and second, which is probably even more important, to have textural variety in my artwork, which is pretty nice effect. So now the modeling of the muzzle of the mouth, and you see I'm making the lips thinner all the time, because they've been really thick before, and they are going to be thinner later. So now I focus on these distances and relationships between the feathers, the lips, and the lower part of the muzzle of the mouth and the chin. And if we squint and if we analyze, we can see that it is just an arrangement of different triangulars. And when you deal with simplified forms, it is way easier to make decisions or just to find out the structure. And sometimes it's very helpful just to try to explain to yourself what exactly do you see. Like the properties of triangles, the angles, the distances between the corners, and etc. So here I continue the modeling. Still the same brush, long flat ivory brush from Rosemary. Ideal for blocking, ideal for big, bold decisions. And to be honest, I don't really care about the details. I don't need them. All I need is just a proper foundation, proper structure, mostly with values and understanding of the planes. And each plane, especially in the light, should be slightly different in chroma and temperature. So I always try to break it down to certain checklists. And in my mind, I constantly ask myself these questions. The value, the shape, the temperature, the actual hue and chroma of each mixture or each plane which I'm painting. So now I move towards the eyes and the forehead, and what is going on is just a refinement of the transitional halftone, which is just next to the core shadow. And I tried to implement the warm-cool relationships already. Reinforcing the shadows. I keep in mind that the nose is going to provide the darkest dark, because the nose is the nearest part of the head to us. So it means that the shadows in the nose, especially occlusions and the beginning of the cast shadow, are going to be darkest dark, because the rest of the shapes are situated slightly on the distance. So due to atmospheric perspective, the shadows in the ears, for example, the shadows are going to be slightly lighter and slightly cooler. Now with the lower eyelids, I try to reduce, to make the eyes slightly smaller, and also I'm preparing myself to change the gaze, and it is already changing, as you can see. And it is why I like this approach so much, because I have freedom to change the tilt, to change the perspective, to change the gaze. Because if I'm relying to my reference too much, if I want just to copy what I see on the photo or in live, I will end up sometimes making weaker painting, but spending more time and effort. So I prefer to process the image instead of just trying to reproduce the information which I have on my retina already. With a long comb eclipse brushes, I smooth everything, and I try to make my brush strokes vertical, because they are reducing unnecessary glare. So if you have this problem when the glare is too strong, and sometimes it's kind of a random and annoying glare on your canvas, try to take soft flat brush or fan brush and gently move it down, make some down strokes to reduce this type of glare. So now I'm revisiting the shadows, first just to redesign them in certain areas, to make them better, to make them more correct, and just to make them darker. Because in the beginning there is no point for me to jump into darkest darks, because what I really need is just relationships and some type of transparency in the shadow, as we discussed. And now I can go in certain areas to make certain shadows darker, like in the hair, for example. Again, I'm revisiting the lower part of the face, because for me it is most difficult and mostly sophisticated part. So many small shapes, so many small planes, subtle planes changing. So I spend probably half of my Alla Prima time on the mouth, nose, and the chin area. And it is also greatest challenge for likeness. If you paint Alla Prima and you feel like likeness is going in and out, like you're losing it, you're finding it back and you're losing it again, try to not rush and do not overthink things. Try to focus on proper construction, alignment to the center line, placement of the landmarks of the face, and the values. Subtle changes in small planes, they are really important for the likeness, and keep it like this. And sometimes with a second layer you can easily fix the likeness issues. Which is really difficult is to fix construction issues, especially if the problem in construction is very severe. But the likeness, sometimes just what is enough is just to fix some small relationships in the mouth or in the brows or in the eyes. In any situation, I prefer proper construction and nice design to likeness. Now I try to find the values in the transitions in the lights. You see that they are slightly darker. The side of the cheekbone areas, side of the head, and also that side of the eye socket, they're slightly darker and they're also cooler. And I try to find this the same relationships to establish them on the canvas. So now it's time to introduce some lightest halftones. Not even lightest lights, not even highlights, but lighter halftones. Because before, everything was built with using shadows and halftones, like transitional halftone and normal halftone. Now I mix cooler and lighter halftone in the light. So if we say about 5 value structures, I have 2 values in the shadows, and now I have, I think, 2 values in the lights, and the highlight will be the lightest value. Redefining small shapes in the brow ridge. And at this point, the structure is there, and I can slow down and try to make it even better, to prepare it for the next layer. Because normally at this stage I can make a decision about the future of the sketch. So I can finish it alla prima, or I can decide that I will work more on top of that with the impastos, with a thicker paint, with the textures, with more modeling. So here I thought that it will be nice to have more finished portrait in the end. So more refinement, more smoothing everywhere. Like the hairline, I don't want to be too abrupt, too contrast, so I just use some soft brush with a light mixture on top of the shadow just to make it optically look softer, to blend it with the skin tones a little bit. So now it's time to model the nose. Just few highlights to begin with. And sometimes I can place the highlights and later I just blend them inside and place another highlights on top better, properly, and sometimes with different temperatures even. So for me, I prefer to have some freedom when I paint alla prima. I really like to do something, and if I don't like or I want to change something, I just blend the wet paint into previous layer, because everything is very wet, and I can just blend things in without making it look dirty. But for this, I focused all the time on the proper temperature, because if the temperatures are wrong, the result will look very muddy in the end, and this I don't like, and I recommend you to focus on the temperatures. So you can make certain mistakes, or you can deviate in value, you can deviate in actual color, but better to stay with just general temperature. Warm, cool, neutral, something like that. So now it's time to finally model the eyes. And why I did it in the end? Because I don't have actual reference for the eyes which I want to paint. Because on my photo the eyes are different, and I've decided to change the gaze and to change the color of the eyes. So for that, first I've built the actual structure, everything. So now I don't look at my reference, just maybe a little bit in general, but I focus only on my canvas. And I want to model the eyes as good as possible for this layer. So when it is dry, I can focus on modeling of subtle forms, on textures, and on making portrait even better and continuing. So this is absolutely important for me, to have nice representation without going into details at this stage. So this is actually the end. And just last thing remains, and this last thing are the highlights in the eyes. And for highlights, I am using just the tip of my palette knife, like this and that. So this is the end. I hope you liked it, and happy painting!